Hey folks, I'm going to be right up front and honest with you. Our guest today is not a Canadian. He's not a 4x4 guy. You're probably wondering what the hell he's doing on 4x4 Canada podcast. Well, he's an off-road racer, races buggies in BC, as well as a couple races back east. And he actually even won a Canadian championship. So we're going to let this one slide a little bit. And we're going to welcome him with open arms because that's what we do as Canadians. We're friendly. Mostly. Are you into four-wheeling, camping, and exploring? How about off-road racing like mud bogs, short course, wheel-to-wheel racing, or even desert races? Well, you've come to the right place. Welcome to 4x4 Canada podcast. My name is Wes, and I've been four-wheeling since I was 6 weeks old. I have over 20 years experience in 4x4 shops, many more than that in the off-road racing, and a lifetime of exploring the backcountry across Canada. Every week, we bring you a new guest where they give you their perspective on the industry. We discuss everything from four-wheeling, overlanding, every form of off-road racing across this great country, as well as we talk to Canadian manufacturers and 4x4 shops. Just a quick reminder that if you're looking for more episodes, you can find all of our episodes on 4x4canadapodcast.com or your favorite podcast sharing platform. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at 4x4canadapodcast.com. Now let's get to the show. Our guest today is not a Canadian. However, he's just across the border in Washington State and raced in British Columbia for a number of years. Actually, even went back east to race his buggy in the big stadiums. So we're going to welcome him today with open arms, just like every time he showed up in Canada to race. It's a Canadian thing to do. Roger Caddell, welcome to 4x4 Canada podcast.
Thank you, Wes. I sure appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this for a while after watching some of your other ones and of course, keeping up with your Facebook page. Really looking forward to chatting with you.
Thanks. I think we're both really excited about this. So you're a buggy racer. You raced buggies for years. How did you get into the buggy racing?
Yeah, it's a lifelong story for me. My father raced drag racing. He was Southern California guy growing up, Torrance, Redondo Beach, in the hot rod era when they were building their own cars, right? And before the first drag strips even came around. And he was part of that group, that car club mentality, and then moved on and he helped open up some of the first drag strips, Lions drag strip in Southern California. So he was kind of a car guy, obviously. And then decided he wanted to move out of that LA, Southern California craziness to raise a family, and actually took a trip in a truck with a friend. Okay, let's go find a place to live, right? You couldn't just go on the internet and look stuff up in the mid 60s, right? So off he went, and he actually had his mind set on moving to Alaska. And for whatever reason, but one of the states I have not been to, by the way, and drove all the way up to Alaska and up the Alcan Highway and through Canada and obviously and up to there, and did some things, and then was coming back and found this almost more perfect area for weather and such as British Columbia, Washington State, northern part of Washington State, and liked it a lot, and ended up moving to Whidbey Island first, up north a little bit, and then now down in a little town near south of Seattle, about 30 miles, Puyallup is where we ended up moving to, but because of that, of course, he moved his family and changed jobs, and he didn't have money for hot rods and such, and had kids. And so then he did something that was kind of interesting. I have two older brothers and a younger sister. And as kids were coming of age, we were about 3 years apart. And so as each kid got up to a certain age, the family kind of took over whatever that kid was interested in, is kind of what happened. And so my oldest brother, David, he really liked boats. And I remember, and I'm not a boat guy, right? But I remember we were out, we purchased a small little boat and without buzzing around on the lakes and having a good time and skiing and whatever. And then my middle brother Jerry, he really liked Volkswagens, and I didn't know what I liked at that point, but the car thing was interesting to me.
Yep.
And so they went through and they built some drag cars and some hot rod VWs and some other stuff, right? And had some fun. And then I was kind of coming along, and my dad wanted, he still had an interest in motorsports, obviously, cars and such. And this whole off-road thing was starting to really take off. The year was about 76 or so is when I was 15 and, 16 years old. And we had a little Volkswagen Pan with a roll bar on it that he had found somewhere, had no motor in it. And I remember I'd push that thing around up and down the driveway from when I was like 14 years old. You couldn't do anything till you're 16, obviously. And we finally got an engine into it, and we took it on a couple of family vacations. And the off-road thing, is a strong and powerful bite, right?
It grabs you.
Once you're into, yeah, exactly. And so we had that thing. We broke it in half. It was a fun little thing. Bought it, and so at some point we sold that, and he bought a two-seater. An old Sandmaster Panzer was what the chassis was, and this had to be it was the first car I ever rode in as far as a race car was, and that was in 1976. And so we had that little two-seater class they used to have called Class 9 at that time, and it was the old 1200 cc's, a little bit maybe like the Challenger cars or something that's current, right? It was a swing axle. It was a 1240
basically horse. Stock.
Oh, almost totally, right? And but it had a couple shocks in the back, and we were able to stiffen up the front end a little bit, and it had a roll cage, and a little bit safer, right? And I rode with my dad, and rode around a little bit, and I was riding, and it was like, and he did okay, right? It wasn't we were top 3 or 4. We had raced Evergreen Speedway was pretty big back then, and in the off-road thing once a month or so, and even up a little bit farther north at Everett. And I remember we were at a race in Everett, and I was riding, and I was 15, and you can only drive when you're 16.
Right.
But I was riding, and it was a gravel pit, and we would race around a track, and it was maybe a mile around, and there was this one area where you'd come across, and then you'd drop down into the gravel pit. And some of the other really high horsepower guys, the guys that had been racing for a while, they would kind of jump off it. And I was in the car riding with my dad, and I'm going, go, And what did I know? My dad would always slide up to it, stop, and then drop the nose over, and then accelerate down, right? Yeah. And I was like, come on. And then you couldn't do that nowadays, but he goes, well, you've been riding around a lot. I've been testing, we had 5 acres, and I was driving it around a little bit. He knew I could drive it a little bit. But so then I think it was like the final of the day or something. He says, well, you just go out and drive it, right? Not being nasty about it, but hey, would you like to give it a shot? I think you're probably ready. And something you couldn't do nowadays with the insurances and the and all the stuff that we do now. But I remember put a couple pillows behind me and off I went. And the only thing I remember about the race, I didn't do well, obviously, but the only thing I remember is I first lap around, I'm coming around, and I'm coming to this drop off, and I'm thinking I'm just gonna I would show. And I
show the old man.
Locked up the brakes and nosed over and did the exact same thing he did for the rest of the race. Right, I had no more guts than he did. So, so we had the two-seater, and then did that one for a while, and we found a single-seater, an older high jumper that was down in California. It had been an ex-Mears, Rick and Roger Mears car.
Okay.
And so we purchased that one, and that was the one that if anybody was around that's watching this from back in the day, that was a car that we ran quite a bit in short course and desert here in the entire area, right? Kamloops and Yakima, and of course all the short course stuff around. And that was we went up to a class, stepped up a class, right? So it was single seater, but we also then put bigger motors in it and went into the unlimited class, and eventually back down to the class 10 stuff. But changed it from swing axle to an IRS and long travel, and the car had an evolution at some level, and so we had the single seater for a while, and then went to a car that I ran a lot in all over Canada and of course the States here. It was a Funko SS2, a short course only car, although we raced in Virginia City and the Vora series and some other a couple of desert races, but really it was a short course car, and that was much faster and funner. And then finally our last car that we ran, we ran all the way up through as a family up to about 2000 or 1990 or so, and we had a Chineth Magnum, one of the short course stadium style cars, and it was bright orange and lime green and fluorescent green.
Yeah,
and
I remember that one.
That was then we ran that car, and that car was really fun, and it had we had a Rabbit in the back, suspension, good transmissions, and the car was really, really quick, and had a good time with that. And then we, as a family, we sold that car, and by that time I was picking up some some rides with some other folks, and got to meet Ron Hart. Had met him. Ron was raced up in Canada a lot with his 1600 two-seaters and some other ones. And Larry Gorley, the owner of Quick and Bright. He bought a couple of other Magnums. One of them was Bob Gordon's last short course car that he had. That's the one that I drove. And we started racing just short course. We went up there to Abbotsford and some other races up there that we did a lot of mission stuff, obviously. And I'm sorry, not Mission, but Hannigan. And then we went back to Crandon a couple of times with that car. And my last race was in 1996, the fall Crandon race with Larry in that Magnum. And we did really well. I was competitive right up to my very last race. We finished, I think, second on the podium in the what they called the Super Buggy class in September '96, and then over that winter just decided that it was my time was probably done as a driver. Go back to that story for a second. I was actually running third most of the time, and had nothing for them. And then whoever Scott Schwalbe was in second place, and I could see him, but had nothing for him, and he ended up breaking. So I moved up to second, but podium nonetheless was fairly.
What a way to finish your racing career, though, on the podium, right?
At the World Championship events at Crandon, right? So I was pretty proud that we were able to be fast right up towards the end, even though I knew it was time to stop because my interest level was coming down. I remember going to that race, and it was like, Tuesday, Wednesday of the week. And it was like, that's right. We got to go fly on Thursday and head back there. I got some stuff I got to do. And, it wasn't the front of my mind. Right. So I got to thinking about that after the race, and I thought, it's not fair. Number one, a little bit dangerous, obviously. That's a fast place, and you have sponsors, and you had all the different things that were going on, and it wasn't fair if you weren't going to give it your all. So decided not to. And when I got out of it, I didn't miss a step as far as wishing to go back. I've been in a couple of race cars since, but never in anything competitive at all, and have not missed that side of it. So that's very, very funny, very odd for drivers.
I was going to say that
be able to turn that around.
Usually drivers say, they'll hang up their helmet, and it's hard for them to not go back, whether it's because of an injury or just because they're getting old, or they fight, screw it, I'm done for a while. It's very hard for them to actually let it go because it gets right into your blood.
Yeah, very much. And I was very, very lucky that, number one, a couple years later, my son started to race go-karts. So I had that release at some level, but even more so, this whole data thing started, this motorsports technology, and some stuff that I'm doing today, even still, that allowed me then to go to the track and work with people and look at information and help them try to get better, and ended up being a great backfill to the driving part. I race short course and desert, right, and a lot. I mean, there was a 6-week period that I raced from San Felipe, Mexico, in a score desert race. Short courses in between Vora and a Kamloops desert race in a 6-week period, 6 races. So every weekend I had raced for six weeks in a row. And it's funny how the muscles that are used in motorsports, especially off-road, can be tuned up, right? And it was funny, but normally you're sore a little bit the day after, and then start to get a little bit better. And in that, I remember that something that stuck out to me that particular 6-week period was, boy, after week 2 or 3, I wasn't even sore. Getting out of the car, the muscles had kind of toned up to be correct. But yeah, 6 straight off-road races in 6 weeks. That was
you must have a wonderful wife.
Well, we ran in 1986. We ran the Canadian National Stadium Championship.
Yep.
You mentioned it in the kind of the opening, and it was a 4-race stadium series with that Funko short course car, and we started in Calgary in April, and then went. It was like 3 days later, we were in BC Place Stadium.
Wow!
And then it was Toronto and Montreal.
Yep.
With a week in between of those. Warren Miller from Maple Ridge
Yep.
While we were never teammates, Warren had built a car that just a wonderful man, and had built a car by himself with some friends, and he decided he wanted to go on this trip. So we chatted about it a little bit, and we split the cost, and he had a truck and camper and a 2-car trailer, and off he went to Toronto and Montreal for the East Coast ones. And we went back there, and the week in between, there was a week between Toronto and Montreal.
Yeah.
Montreal was actually first. Then there was a week in between, and then it was Montreal, and I got married in that week in between, right? So it was to the wonderful wife that you talked about. So it wasn't like it was something she didn't know was happening. So luckily, but she is, and we're still together. It's many years later, right? So yeah, you are correct.
Yeah, no doubt. So let's talk about that series back in '86. Now, as you mentioned, it was Calgary, Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto. You did pretty well in that series.
It was one of those that was very difficult on a racer,
Yeah.
because in '85 I didn't run the entire series. We just ran the Vancouver one round, right? And because when you go to an event like that, it's a one-time off for you. Right? We were a low budget outfit, even though we spent everything we could and put as much time and effort into it, and had good stuff, but we really didn't have that kind of money, right? So we went up to that one, and that was when the car Funko was brand new to us. It was less than a year old car, and we went into that event and won it in '85. And so then we ended up with this relationship with BF Goodrich, because we were actually running Hoosiers at the time, and it was a huge BF Goodrich sponsored event, right?
Yeah.
And so we chatted with them, and we ended up with, as an American, a Canada, BF Goodrich of Canada sponsorship.
I was going to ask you about that, because one of the photos that you sent me, there's you and Scott Taylor, who is a very famous American short course racer.
Northern states.
Yeah, exactly. Not many people realize that he actually started in buggies before he went to the trucks.
Yep, exactly.
But
exactly.
There's you and Scotty Taylor, along with a bunch of very famous Canadian off-road racers.
Prominent Canadian.
Very prominent, Joel Croft and Bill Lefebvre and basically the BF Goodrich team. And I'm like, well, wait a minute.
yeah. What are the Americans doing on the Canadian team? And it was because of our location, right? And I've actually talked to Scotty Taylor about that a little bit here and there, right? We were those odd guys out, right? But because of our location, and we raced a lot in Canada, and we were both pretty good at what we were doing, right? So then, Now there's a tough call for the BF Goodrich of Canada, folks, right? Do they want somebody to come in there and be running X brand and winning occasionally, or do they just bring them into the fold? And I don't remember the fellow's name right now, but he chatted with me at the '85 Vancouver event after the race, and we chatted back and forth, and we didn't have emails and stuff back then, right? So we were trying to get as much done as we could, and then we chatted on the phone afterwards a little bit, and we put together a deal where I would run as a BF Goodrich driver starting in '86. So then, very very odd back then. A lot of the folks that were racing back then probably will recall, getting across the border with your race cars was not the easiest thing in the world. And tons of Canadians were coming down and running Hannigan, which was only a short way across the border, north of Bellingham. So they were having to go through it just as much as I was when I would go up and run Mission and Abbotsford and some of the other tracks that we were running up there, plus, of course, the stadium stuff. And what was happening is I would have the tire budget, right? And then I was also I was going down and running Vora, or we would go down and run Riverside, and we needed, tires and such for what we were trying to do down there as well. So he worked with the USA BF Goodrich folks. Frank DeAngelis was the fellow down in the States, and I would go up there with worn out tires and to a Canadian event, whenever, and go to some tire store somewhere, work it all out, and I would come back across the border with everything mounted up, same number of tires, but all brand new BFGs, all mounted on every wheel we had, right, and ended up meeting all the specs of the border stuff, right. So kind of a good relationship, but had a great time. The 1986 one, though, was difficult because we were a BF Goodrich driver. We were going to run the entire series. And so you go into it thinking, now it's a series thing, it's a points thing.
Yep.
I knew too many people were going to run the entire 4 races.
That's a tough haul. That's a long ways between, Ontario and Montreal and BC. Like that's
huge, right? It's Canada and the States, huge countries, right? And so I went into the thing with I can run as hard as I can, and it's off-road racing, and things are going to break, and you're not going to finish, or you're going to crash or whatever, right? And so I went into it with a little bit of a mindset of a points chaser, and we ended up with 2 seconds and 2/6 or 2/5 or 6, something like that. The Montreal event was a huge event, and the Toronto also had a lot of cars, but the Montreal was probably half of the cars were the California short course guys, stars of the world at that point, right? So finishing fifth there was quite a good achievement, actually, in the Montreal event.
Yeah.
But the disappointed that we didn't win any, but had that mindset of just got to finish every one of them, right? Do the best you can,
Yep.
don't tear anything up, and get the points. And we ended up becoming the champion. And that was always a disappointing place to be as a racer, but great. Championships mean things, so those are important things to do. So that was always tough. Warren drove across the country, and a funny story, and I don't know if it's the same now, but Warren had a propane powered truck, very popular in BC area at the time. And a lot of people, right? And then so he has this propane powered truck, and off he heads to the east after the Vancouver. He has 1 week to get there, right?
Yeah.
The race is Saturday night in Vancouver, and it's the very next Saturday night is Montreal. And so he heads out, and we're chatting on the phone occasionally as he's going. And there's times in the middle of the night he's trying to, it's a good 4-day drive, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he's got 7 to do it, but he's running out in the middle of the night. He's trying to drive late and can't find propane stations. It's not nearly as popular. It turned out propane at fuel stations were only open during the day. There was no late night stuff, so he had to wait for fuel stations to open to fill up his truck sometimes. Ended up getting there. The race was Saturday night. Warren pulls in Friday night at like midnight into town. I mean, it was that kind of close, and they got very little sleep, and met him at the track in the morning, and we offloaded the cars and kind of cleaned them up a little bit, and went and raced the race. But Warren was just a great guy, and did it all with a smile on his face, and had a great time, and he did well too. I think second place in points. I don't think his finishes weren't quite as good, but I think he finished all of them, and had a good Montreal. Montreal was hard. I mean, there was 30 some cars there, and I think they only took 12 or 13, maybe 14 to the final.
Yeah.
And just to make the final was difficult, and then to race in it. And I remember somebody jumped on top of me right off the starting line and broke a front shock line off. And I had to drive that entire stadium race with a single shock front end, and with one of the lines missing, and that wheel was just whipping, and it was going to rip off at some point, right? But still ended up with a 5th place finish. So did okay.
Yeah, Montreal for a number of years has been a huge race for the Buggy guys. It's even into the later races in the 2000s and that there's a lot of guys. You get Corey Witherall, and he's won up there a few times.
He won it a couple times, yeah.
Yeah, and you get some of the these big guys, or the guys that are racing and winning down at Crandon coming up, and they're not winning in Montreal. It's just
the Probsts,
yep.
and some of those guys, and Jerry Welchel and Gordon and all those guys were there, right? And the prize first, they paid well, but the first prize was a pound of gold, literally a brick of a pound of gold. That was real money, right?
Yeah. I'd forgotten about that. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting.
So had a really good time.
Yeah. And the Buggy, and because of those races, there's a ton of great buggies and buggy drivers out in Quebec as well. They cross over into the Ontario racing, and they're still going back and forth between them on the series. But yeah, they've got some really fast buggies out there. So
have some really good friends that came through the buggies and ended up in Pro Light from Ontario, the Dinsmores.
Yep.
Travis and his dad Greg. I travel back to Toronto quite a bit and do my racing stuff I do now. And whenever I'm in town, they always go way out of their way. I've gone to dinner at their place every time that I've visited town, and they make a big barbecue, and we just sit back and have fun and talk about stuff. And they're they've even got a Pro 4. The pandemic hit them hard, of course. Any Canadians trying to come down to run the Crandons and that, they very, very difficult, obviously. So
definitely, yeah.
Kind of sad about that, but the Dinsmores, great friends of mine.
They're a great family. I got to know them quite well when I was in Ontario, and very open and welcoming family, and they'll help anybody. Very much. Yeah, and I was actually talking to Greg the other day, and he's going to be coming on the podcast soon. There was another Well, there's a couple series in BC that ran for a while. There's Agassiz had a track
Hmm.
out there, and then of course Mission.
Hmm.
There's some racing in Mission and that. And then there's another series that lasted for a year or two and had wheel racing and sand drags and that. And I believe it was up in Fort St. John, Quesnel, Kamloops, and then Cloverdale. And I think you did some of that series, right?
The Kamloops, a couple of them. The one I took our own car. The Kamloops, some of the Kamloops ones I did with Ron Hart,
Okay.
and we had a great time. Kamloops is my Canadian home away from home, right? It's such a great place for off road we did a lot up there way back in the day, even. But the Cloverdale, I remember that. I think it from at least from my memory, it was a one time only thing that maybe they
Yeah.
did it more than once, but we only raced there one time. And I remember that was a crazy one for us. We were a fast car. We kind of traveled up with Mike Strong, another
Yep.
guy my age from this area here down here, and we kind of traveled up there together. And Bob Johnson was there, and a couple of others guys from the States were there, obviously. And then that track was really weird. It was a horse race track, right? It was I don't know what kind of material it was, but it was slippery when you actually were on a car. And the track went off and did some other things, and then got onto the main horse race track. And something happened early on to my car. We either got spun out, or I think a plug wire fell off or something. I was actually either somebody put it on, or I jumped out and fixed it and got back in, but I got behind. And then it was just this just craziness was going on, right? I was going absolutely as fast as I could because I was mad, and we had a fast car, and passing people left and right. And you came down the back straightaway, and I'll never forget it. There was an opening in the fence, right, where the horse inner rail,
Right.
where the horses would normally be on their left edge as they were traveling around, and they had a opening, and then there was a gate beyond it, next to it, and that second opening was turns out exactly as wide as a car. But so I came down the first lap that I got running, and I pitched the car sideways, and I was waiting for it to opening to come up as I was sliding, and then I would kind of like hammer it and just squirt through that through the hole, right, and off into the infield part of the track. And I just kept going faster and faster because I was making up time and I was catching people, but I was way behind. And one time I slid past it, and there was these two big posts, and I mean they were like 12 or 18-inch round, telephone poles that were buried, I think, if I remember right. They were large nonetheless. And I remember looking at it, and it was either stop, back up, and then go through the normal racetrack opening, or you know fit through this tiny little hole that my eye was telling me it was close. And so I just hammered it, and I went through it. And the funny part is we ended up racing. I have no idea where we finished. We did okay, but later on I walked back over to that, and I'd been the only one that had done that. And there were tire marks on both sides, on both of the poles. So it darn near ripped off the rear wheels, but sidewalls hit on the way through. So Cloverdale, have good memories. I remember somebody taped it, but I've never had it was on TV or some sort of presentation, and I've never had a chance to see it.
I've seen it once, and this is probably going back, 20 years ago or something like that. But, if anybody listening to this has a copy of that, I would love to get a copy, because it was
be great on one of your Facebook pages.
Exactly.
Where you do a lot of that.
Yeah, exactly. So you raced obviously in Canada a lot, and you're quite successful. Who were some of your strongest Canadian competitors?
Oh, there was always 4 or 5 guys that were pretty fast, right? Yeah. And we were amongst them. But I remember Bill Lefebvre, you mentioned him. Of course, he was from back east. We didn't race that much in the northwest, but he was one of my favorites. I got to meet him during that 1986 series. He ran the eastern half.
Yep.
And him and Joel Croft, and they were BF Goodrich guys, and they were just fantastic. Chatted with them off and on for many years, even after that, and so it was really good. But Jerry Charlton was a name that, and I never got to know Jerry all that well. We were pretty strong competitors, right? But we would know each other. We would chat a little bit here and there, but I didn't know him well, but always extremely fast. We always ran class 10, the 1600 cc's, and he ran open class power didn't make that much difference on the short course stuff. So we would always be battling, right? And in the same class effectively. So Jerry Charlton, a couple of other ones Calvin McKenzie was another guy that was always out there. Mike Strong was an American down here that came up and raced a lot. Not a competitor, but the flagman, Rocky Weinstein.
Oh yeah.
Rocky was around forever. He's such a hard worker in the sport and made it all work up. Of course, being official a couple times, we would have some words occasionally, but always had great respect for him. A couple other names. One of them was Ken Wardstrom.
Yes.
Ken was never super fast, right? But him and his family, and they just really enjoyed themselves. And he was pretty quick too, and always doing things with his car he always had different motor combinations and stuff. And I always really, really enjoyed him. Terry and Sean Pritchard were names. They always ran in different classes, but we were friends and chatted and had some good times. So those were just some of the names that I chatted down as I was. Memory is not nearly as good as it used to be. Gary Nierop too. I was just checking another one. He was fast. And,
he was very fast.
He was always very, very, very fast. And of course, the Chamberlains and some of those folks that are still around as well. All good folks. Always accepted, like unbelievably well accepted in Canada. I always tell the folks that we would race down in Nevada or whatever, and they, folks would know that I raced up there, and I'd never met a Canadian off-road racer that I didn't like. Right, it just didn't happen, and let us join the brotherhood there. Right, it had a great time racing up there. It was always the best, and then the desert stuff too.
Yep.
When I got in with Ron Hart and running Kamloops was such a great place. One of my early memories, before when I was still running our own stuff, before I even ran with Ron, I don't remember where in the facility, but you would go down into like a little valley, not a valley, but a little a green area, and you'd race across, and then there was this uphill, probably about 10 or 12 foot up, and then flat out of it. I remember going there. I hadn't been out on the track yet. It was the buggies, and there was the trucks were running, and there was this a Toyota Land Cruiser with a V8, a Chevy V8, and they called it a Chevoda, right? I think was the name on the side. And this guy he raced across that green, lush meadow-ish thing, and then this 10 or 12 foot up, and then across, and he launched off that thing. And now again, I'm 18, 19 years old, whatever, and I'm watching this guy before I go out on the track, and he noses in, he hits and endos this thing over and over, and I'm going, whoa. After that, we raced that track probably 8 or 10 times. I never launched it off that stupid jump. That Toyota Land Cruiser with the Chevy V8 in it never left my mind of him crashing that thing. It's like, oh my goodness. But I loved that. And the other one, part of Kamloops that a lot of people might remember, is there was on the backside somewhere you were cruising along, and then you come down this massive downhill.
Yeah. I don't
remember how.
I actually did that hill a couple weeks ago, came down it.
and we used to do those. And it's, I don't know how long. I remember in a 1600 car, no power. I would come off the top of that, you were maybe in second gear rolling off the top, right? And I would rev it up in second, and I would skip third, go straight to fourth, because it was so steep, and it would be on the chip halfway down. And then it was all about. And then it came down and it slowly flattened out, and it would slowly go uphill on the backside. And I remember it was all about picking a line that had not gotten chewed up so you could keep your speed.
Right. Yeah.
And then I remember Scotty Peterson was a friend of Ron's, and Scotty went on to become just a fantastic driver himself in stadium, and it just has a current stadium car now. He's either running or getting together. And Scotty was riding with me in Ron Hart's 2-seat Raceco. And we went off the top of that thing and down that thing, and I just kept moving over to keep on hard ground, right? And to keep the speed as best I could up the backside of that hill. And we hit a rock that was hidden behind the grass, right? And I seen it like, you're doing 80 maybe. Those cars weren't terribly fast, but certainly top speed. And I saw it like 20 or 30 feet from it. There is nothing you can do. and it hit, and it just shot up in the air, and nose high, luckily, and traveled along for a while. And Scotty's riding over there. He was a 15-year-old or something at that point, right? And darned if the car didn't come down and land. It had bent the beam a little bit, but not terrible. And Scotty and I, we still talk about hitting that rock at Kamloops. Don't go into the grass at the base of that hill, right? There's some
There's
hidden gems out there.
I'm involved with the 4-Wheel Drive Association of BC, and we've taken that ORV park area over
Oh,
and trying to
very
keep
cool.
it open so that people
I
can
hope
still
so.
do their four-wheeling in that. And we're out putting some signs around the wet areas to not go into the wet areas and that. And I was telling people, we're looking at the hill, and we ended up going down it. And I was telling people I was with that guys that hit second and third gear are coming down this hill. And they're like, no way. And it's
way fourth in buggies, right? Not the big stuff in the trucks, maybe third, but they only have 3 gears. But we were as fast as it would go, and it would be fast as it could go halfway down the hill. There was nothing left. I mean, it's steep.
It is.
Do you go the other way up it? I mean, it has to be a little bit spooky going up the other way.
I've never gone up it. I've always just gone down.
It's too steep, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you got halfway and didn't make it, it would roll a long time.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I've never even wanted to go up it.
Desert racing, I really enjoyed doing both. You have short course, which is this head down mindset of just plow your way through, do whatever you're going to do, 105% on afterburner all the time, right?
Yep.
And then you got desert where it's nowadays you can go pretty fast, but the cars are so much better, right? But back then, if you ran as hard as you could go, the cars weren't going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
When we first started in short course, you couldn't go as hard as you could go. The cars, front spindles and tie rods and steering boxes and stuff were popping. But I really enjoyed the desert because you would go up there and you do like 95%. And it taught me a lot. One made me better for the other. And the desert thing, I was really quick in desert cars, especially in the 1600 class and the low speed stuff. Because one of the things I figured out really quickly as a driving style was corner speeds were important, off the jumps were important, all that stuff was important. But what was really key to making lap time was to get the car woed down and get it to rotate, and then back on the throttle as early as possible, and effectively making the next straightaway longer. And he who gets on the throttle first typically is going to win in an equal world, right? And that really carried over. And I started to notice it in the desert cars, in the low horsepower desert cars. I would come off of a corner, and you would read the desert, and you could see how high the berms were, and it was all about getting back to the throttle as fast as you could. And that really, really paid dividends in desert racing, and then started to really use it in the short course stuff as well.
Yep, definitely.
I was, if anybody out there remembered when we were racing back then, I was not even close to the fastest car, the most spectacular driver. If you see pictures of me when it was high in the air, it was on accident. I mean, there were guys. We always joked about our Canadian friends that they were the crazy ones, right?
Calvin
Jared
McKenzie.
Charlton and Calvin McKenzie especially, just launching it, right? And I was never that guy. It was always about only go as fast as you need to off the jumps, and then get down on the ground and go.
Right.
It stemmed from a very, very early bad crash that I had when I was 16, when we were out testing the car before my first official race. I had done that one that was non-official,
right?
But it was a couple days after my 16th birthday. We were testing that high jumper, and out at a big test track we had out on Army Fort Lewis Army territory out here near our home, and I was in the dust. We were out there with 2 different cars. Ours was out there as well. Yeah. And I was in his dust, and there was 2 humps that you would go over on this little road. One of them was just go as fast as you wanted to, and on the backside it was just nice. The other one was a big old washout with a 2 or 3 foot high bump on the exit of it, right? And where the water had kind of taken away the edge, where it was almost straight up and down.
Right.
And I thought I was on the first one at 16 years old, and I was just flat to the floor, just having a good time. And so I launched off this second one, which I thought was the first one. And when I'm in the air, I look down, and then I see that I'm about in trouble, right? I'm not where I thought I was. I'm in the air, and the front end dove right into that about 3 foot high wall of dirt, and the car just went end over end like 5 or 6 times.
Wow.
The motor was held in by one bolt left and the throttle cable. I mean, the motor almost came out.
Yeah.
It was a violent one, right? Both front tires came off. It was a big one at 16. And ever since then, number one, I I never thought this car would do that in my own mind, right? Knocked me out. I was out for a while.
Oh,
And then finally, before everybody got to me, I popped my head up, and I didn't realize I was out till later on. We were chatting, and they said, no, it took us about a minute to get there. I was near the truck where everybody was standing, and they all kind of ran that way. And when I popped up, they were almost there, right? And knocked me out, broke a finger in the steering wheel, and it just tore it up. And I never thought this race car would do that to me, right? And then from then on, I had an entirely different approach to driving, and I didn't want the car to do that to me again. We kept track, right? And I think it was like 12 or 13 different separate rollovers of cars that I was involved in. That was the only hard one. They were all just, falling over in a corner from trying too hard or something, right? But so that changed my entire driving style and how I approached everything, and didn't take the big chances, but really pushed the high percentage moves, right? And it served us really well.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. There's a couple things in regards to the desert racing. In order to win, first you got to finish. But you mentioned the crossover between the short course and the desert racing and how that makes you a better driver for each of them. And Dale Nesty and I were talking on this podcast a while ago, and when he went into doing some of the road course stuff, he was also racing short course at the same time. And he was finding that he learned to go into the corners faster on his road course on the pavement, and he started doing that in the short course. And he was finding that he'd go passing a couple guys going into the corner, and then passing guys coming out of the corner as well, right? And he said, doing that pavement stuff just made him such a better driver off-road as well. And there's stuff that he would take from his off-road days and put into the pavement stuff. Now he's racing the sprint cars and that. But it's quite interesting how somebody that's open to learning, if they're running two different styles of racing, how they can help each different style.
Yeah, I think the experience is boss, no matter what, right? And so I now in my current job, I work for a company named AIM that creates digital dashes for racing. Karting, all forms of motorsports, right? Off-road is a big part of what we do. What I found was I'd never road raced, right? But yet when I would get and start talking with guys that had been road racers or motorcyclists, and then now they're doing off-road or coming from off-road to pavement, the overall skill is very, very similar. But what you focus on ends up being something that's very important.
Right.
And as an example, my youngest son started racing go-karts not long after I retired from driving. And I think he started in 98. And I had never been around a go-karts. And so he was learning all of that as he went. And then he did nothing but pavement. Started in go-karts. Then we did circle track, Legends cars, Bandoleros, then Legends. And he did a couple years of that because he was only 14. And SCCA and NASA and conference here in our area would only allow you to road race once you were 16.
Right.
And that's really what he wanted to do because it was karting. The karting that we did was what they call sprint. So it was left and right turns, right? Little mini road courses. When he got stepped up and got into a Spec Miata, which is a big class here in North America in road racing, the everyman's class, right? You can afford it. It's a car that's fairly inexpensive. Inexpensive is a relative term in motorsports, but the fairly inexpensive. And at the time, he was we were ready to move him up to some sort of sports car. It's like, okay, what should we do? We had no alliance. And so I just went on the Portland was the local club with the largest that we were probably going to race at. I went on there and just looked at the results and what is the class that has the most cars, right? That's how little I knew about road racing. It was just like, I have no idea what's going on locally. Let me just go online and it was between what they called Spec Racer Ford, which is kind of a tube frame, fiberglass body, Ford powered car, and that's Spec. And then there's the Spec Miata. And Spec Miata had like 3 or 4 average higher car count. So it's like, well, Spec Miata, that's probably what we ought to get. We want competition, right? That's where we want to go. And he'll get better if he's racing against faster people.
Definitely.
So we found a Spec Miata in 2005. And found it, paid like $7,300 or $7,400 for it. And then the class had become a national class in 2006, the next year. And so we started kind of running some national events locally, obviously. We couldn't travel a ton. And in 2006, we ran we went to the SCCA runoffs, which was in Topeka, Kansas that year. And he ends up 60 some cars entered from all over the country.
Wow.
First year Spec Miata was a national class, and he ends up winning the runoffs as a 17-year-old. And so very did well, ran that a couple of years. Then Mazda got him into the MX-5 Cup series, which was a national series. He ran that for a little bit for a year, and then Ford helped him, and we got into a Mustang Challenge series, another spec series. Ran all over the country in different venues with the Mazdas and the Fords. Trois Rivers was a track that we'd been to a couple of times, and just really enjoyed that place back there. And then sponsorship was such, and that we're trying to figure out what we're going to do next. And Traxxas, which is an RC car company, obviously big off-road.
Very much.
RC is pretty big in the off-road radio controlled cars. And we had known them, and they had known Andrew, and they were going to sponsor him for another year back into the Mazda MX-5 Cup series. And they got to thinking about it. They had started running Pro 4 and Pro 2 in the short course series in California and the Midwest. And they said, you know what, we should probably just bring Andrew up here and have him run the Pro Light, because it's we're there already. We want to have a Pro Light. We want to have a truck in each class. They were series sponsors at that point. We were just stepping up to be the series sponsors. And so Andrew got into the Traxxas Pro Light truck. And we went and tested at Crandon a couple of weeks ahead of time. First race of the year was Crandon. Yep. And now for a kid that had never been, he'd been to off-road races, obviously. Yep. I mean, he'd traveled with me and had been around it till he was about 10. And then we had even visited with Larry Gorley when he was running Quick and Bright cars back at in Crandon, and probably in the late 90s, went back and hung out with him. So Andrew was there, and he's seen some stuff. And now he's there, right? And he's going to go run this truck. We practiced. We had one day of testing, and then we went back for the race. And first big year of Pro Light back there, of the V8 era of Pro Lights.
Right. Yep.
And so there was a bit of a change, which helped us. And darned if he didn't go to his very first race at Crandon as a kid that nobody knew, didn't come up through the buggies, didn't do anything, only Pro Light, and he ends up winning the very first race out of the box, right? He won the first day and was second the second day. And so walked out of there with a pretty good weekend, and everybody's going, well, who in the heck is this, right? And then the off-road world kind of caught up with him. Because Crandon is a lot like a road course. You drive it, like Dale was talking. It's more apex to apex, and you kind of race it, right? And then we started to go to Chicago land, where a purpose-built short course, right? Very, very tight. Then the off-road gods weren't so nice to him sometimes, right? Because then you had to know how to off-road race, which is a little different. And he learned it obviously quickly, and ended up winning the championship there, second the first year, and won it the second year. So the off-road gene, it crossed over to him at some point. He really enjoyed it, and had a good time. So,
and that must made you proud, as a father, watching your son.
All of it does, obviously, but. I really didn't want him to do the off-road. The off-road thing's hard, right? And number one, it's hard on cars. You can win the race, and you could have a perfect race and no problems whatsoever. When you come home, you got to tear the car all apart, clean it, fix stuff that's bent and broken and cracked. And racing makes so much more sense to me on the pavement, because if you went out and did well, you would just wipe the car down and you're ready for the next race, right?
Change the fluids and you're done.
Yeah, but off-road had a draw to him, and he did really well at it. There were some spectacular crashes there that you watch them from the outside, and it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But the cars are so much more safer nowadays, and the head and neck restraint stuff.
Yep.
Is amazing, and the containment seats that he was that were in everything he did are amazing, and the suspension. Funny story. I ran Crandon in a buggy, and I would go through turn one flat. Yeah. Right. I'd never lift off the throttle. And again, short course car, probably 85 miles an hour, maybe it would be my guess. And we didn't have speedometers or anything, but not terribly fast. That Pro Light's going through there at about 100, and the Pro 2s and Pro 4s at 105, 108, 110. And I remember going through there at 80, 85 in a buggy and thinking I was right on the edge of the world, right? It was nuts. And I remember at the time, and now they're still going through it flat.
Yeah.
And he did as well. It was fourth or fifth time out. He was flat through turn one in a pro light, right? And it just really, I was lucky enough to work with Rob McCachran.
Yep.
For 3 or 4 years when he was driving for Traxxas, and then he was a teammate of Andrew's with Mopar, came on board, and they drove factory-backed Mopar trucks in the Torque series back then. Rob was in a Pro 2 and Pro 4, and Andrew was driving the Pro Light, all colored up in blue Mopar. And because of that, I did data work with Rob as well. And to see what that guy could do with a throttle pedal in an off-road truck, it was one of the best of our lifetime off-road race car drivers, obviously, right? And he's out there in the mud, first few laps when they've watered the track, and he's going through turn one in a Pro 2 and just flat to the floor and not lifted. And it's just like, really, that is just amazing to me. Off-road drivers are amazing people to watch. What they can do is
they are
amazing with the equipment.
It's we've you take a look at Rob McCachran, or so many off-road drivers that are incredible drivers.
Amazing.
So
amazing.
You've done the desert racing and you've done the short course. What do you prefer?
What I always liked is to skirt your question a little bit. It was amazing. I was very, very lucky, man, that I had Ron Hart, especially Mike Olson from the Sacramento area. I would go do a desert race, and you would look forward to it because it's such a different animal, mm-hmm. right? And then you're out there for 400 miles. In Mike Olson's cars, we did the Urington 400 down in Nevada a couple times, and I drove the entire race myself, and it was 9 hours and 7 minutes was the fastest I did the entire race by myself, and I never undid the seat belts. In 9 hours and 7 minutes, never stopped. We didn't have a flat tire. We had zero problems, right? So I think we fueled up 2 times, and I would get a drink of water or something like that, and go. And so at the end of it, you're just like you're cooked. Right?
Oh yeah, you're spent.
You're done, right? I mean, I hate desert racing. And then it would be back to the short course for 3 or 4 of them, and then pretty soon that desert has that pole, right? And whether it's Kamloops or it's Baja or it's whatever, the desert has that wide open, just full focus way of driving that is fun to me, and please bring on a desert race, right? And we'll go back and do it again, right? So I was lucky that I had that mix that I could do both, and we had 2-seaters and single-seaters, and I did not like 2-seaters. I hated to ride. I did that with a number of people, Mike Strong especially. I used to ride with Mike in some desert racing when we were both kids, and then we had 2-seaters that people would ride with me, and I'm never super comfortable. You're putting yourself out there, and while we're all having a good time, it's there is a bit of danger there. And if you're really at the limit, I hate to put somebody else in there with me, and have something go wrong, right? And so we did it. Ron Hart rode with me. Funny story: Ron Hart rode with me in Bend, Oregon, Milliken Valley. Ron Hart jumped in the car, and he was going to ride with me, right? I'd been driving his car, and we went out there and we did 1 lap, and he's saying to pit, at the end of 30 miles, right? Pit, and I'm going, what for? Everything's fine, and I wasn't driving terribly hard, I didn't think. And he says, I just need to get out. So he's undoing his belts, right? And I slow down. He bails out, and I just took back off. And then we had a pit stop a little bit later, and I remember his oldest son, he jumped in the car. And we did 1 lap, and he was going, I got to get out. No, I'm done, right? And they didn't understand, what high-speed desert stuff was really all about. And then Ron, the Canadian story with Ron, we were at Kamloops, I'm sure, in the 2-seater, and we were running through the trees. There was I don't remember what it was, but there was some trees on the course. And there was a car that we were catching that was having some trouble, going fairly slow at least. And we were second gear, back and forth around, just wrapping around trees and following him in the dust. And I caught up with him, and there was a bit of a dip. We're coming up behind him, and the guy stalled it, and he was getting stuck, right? And it was like, if we stop, we're stuck too, right? So Ron was riding with me, and we talked about it later, but I come up to behind him, and we're doing 30 or whatever, and I hit the brakes and just locked it up right up to, and then we had a big rubber bumper on the front bumper.
Yeah.
And I touched that car, and I was off the brake and on the throttle and just pushed him up out of the hole, right? And the timing was, it's one of those things that you don't do. I could never do it again, right? It was, I hit the brakes. I was literally all four tires locked up and right up against him, and hit the throttle right at the right time, pushed him up and out of the way and took off. And Ron was just like going, what in the heck just happened? I was about ready to bail out, and you pushed him out. It was perfect. So Ron, later on in that couple laps later, he bailed out again. Though he didn't want no part of riding after a while. So,
well, it's something that's that not everybody can be a co-driver. Like you said yourself, it's not something you're fond of. Myself, I'm not that great of a race driver, but I have no problem with being a co-driver. But a lot of people cannot get rid of that control feeling.
Disassociate that fear and the out of control, and actually do what a co-driver does best, which is understand the car, look farther out on the track, help on all those
gauges,
things, right? Which a co-driver can do very well. So, and I never could. I'm about to die. if I'm riding, this was terrible. One thing I've noticed you've done on your podcasts, and a big part of on your Facebook pages, is the overlanding thing. And I have been watching videos, the fellow with the Hummer that I actually have watched some of his YouTube pages before you had mentioned it, because it's an interest of mine. It's off-road, right? And so I watch him, and I watch a couple guys from like Australia and all over. And I was an off-road racer, and everything was about speed, and the overlanding thing, I'm probably too old now. I probably will not ever do anything like that. But it's so fun to watch what they do. It's off-road, but 100% different, 180 degrees different how they approach it, right? It's not the speed, it's the controllability, it's living in the moment, out in the elements, in the desert, in the woods, whatever. You're carrying what you need to camp and to have fun with your friends and see the backcountry, and it's a whole different world of off-roading that I am just intrigued by. I just find it so cool. This guy in Australia that I watch, that goes out for 10 or 12 days at a time, right? And he's got enough fuel on board and water and everything to sustain himself. And it's just an amazing thing to me. I applaud all the folks that are doing that. I think that would be where I would be if I chose to do any off-roading now. That's where I would be.
I'm lucky where I've done both worlds. I've done the off-road racing, and I've both short course and distance. But now I'm finding that I would rather just go up on top of a mountain and camp and stuff like that. And I was going to say it's a lot less expensive than racing, but it can be just as expensive
to do it really right? And then to do it correctly, you really need to have two or three folks with you, and that's the fun part of it, right? You've got your friends around you, and you've got some backup help. Modern electronics nowadays with satellites, and you get out of cell phone range pretty quickly, but there are ways to cover yourself, right, with some of these sat devices.
Definitely.
But or having people with you and being able to get unstuck or unbroke. Some of the coolest stuff I've ever done is you break down in the middle of Baja, out in the middle of somewhere, and back then we didn't have GPS, we didn't have radios. You got to how are you going to fix this car enough to get out, right? We've chained up front ends of buggies and straps and tape and baling wire, and you drive your way out at least to get to go out. One of the most impressive things to me of off-road racers, especially desert racers, obviously, is it's the finish the race. You find yourself out of the running, that's disappointing. And okay, we're not going for the win anymore, but there's the bigger goal, and that is don't let the desert beat you. And I watch modern desert racers. Some of them disappoint me occasionally. They'll have a flat tire, or they'll break a shock or whatever, and they're an hour behind in a trophy truck or something, and they pull off and they load it on the trailer and they go home. And then I watch people as big a name as Robbie Gordon. Watch him, and he inevitably he'll have some trouble, right? He drives pretty hard, pretty fast, and inevitably he'll have trouble. And I've never seen him once ever yet at the Baja 1000 or something, and he's 5-6 hours behind, but the team puts the truck back together.
Yep.
He personally gets back in the thing and he races it to the finish line. And it's important to desert racers to finish and not let the desert beat them. I'm lucky enough to call him a friend. We chat occasionally, and I am always impressed by him and that how big a name he is, and that he has nothing to gain by just putting it on the trailer once he's out of the race. But he's still
he's got that drive. I mean, he grew up in it, right? I mean, his father Bob was, a huge, influence in racing, for years.
Legendary.
Yeah, exactly. So I think with him growing up in it and, him racing with his dad for years, I think that was kind of instilled in him, whereas some of these new people may not have that.
They don't understand that mystique of desert racing and that piece of, but that's critical. When you left your camper that morning and got into your race car,
yep.
The main goal was to finish that 250 miles or that 400 miles or whatever it happened to be.
Yeah.
And yes, you're racing everybody else and you want to be the first in your class to get there, but the end game is to finish the race and to beat the desert. And I see people that don't do that. And to keep it on Robbie just for another minute, you talk about overlanding, you talk about short course, and you talk about desert, and then you've got that whole desert raid, that whole Dakar thing that Robbie has done quite a bit. And to me, that's the ultimate. If I was younger and you had that ability, that is something else, right?
Yeah.
And Robbie always talked about it, where it's like 7 or 8 desert races in a row, right? It's 250 to 300 miles per day, and you only have the tools that are in your car and to work on it. There are sometimes they don't even let the crew touch it.
Yep.
But at least you have your crew and you have some trucks that are following you around, but you don't have a big shop waiting for you. You have to build it and fix things up and get yourself ready to go the next morning. Can you imagine as a driver to beat yourself up for 8-10 days in a row of desert racing like that? Had some good friends that were crew members on Andrews Pro Light, 2 or 3 of them that went to Dakar one of the times that Robbie ran there, and to chat with those guys, even from the support team side and how they race ahead and get ready to go. And then the drivers, then they work all night on the cars, depending on what's broken,
exactly.
what needs to be done. And then they got to get back into those great big old rigs and drive them to the next pit area, bivouac or whatever they call it, and be ready to go to work on it when they get there. They pick up an hour or 2 of sleep as they can. It's just an amazing adventure.
That'd be a dream of mine for sure. That's
off-road racing to a different level. And I find that to be very, very interesting. Although the overlanding is a little slower for an old guy like me at this point, right? They say, the older you are, the faster you were, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that happens with me, but it also, I am always amazed when I watch any short course racing on TV, or I go to a lot of them, and I watch how fast everybody goes nowadays. And it's compared to the cars we had and our abilities, we were very slow relative to what they are today, but it's still great fun.
Well, the technology has changed so much, and sometimes I like to go back to the old racing, in the 90s and the 80s and stuff like that, and things just seemed simpler. But the technology these days, everything's changed so much, with, trophy trucks are running 40-inch tires and, the shocks and that are just incredible. And everything, like, we didn't even have bead locks back,
Exactly. You have a wonderful page on Facebook that you keep up with. I think it's vintage or something like that. I don't remember. You have a bunch of them, right? But one of them is that there's a bunch of you have pictures of a bunch of older buggies.
Yeah.
And some of them predate my time even. But I look at those images and I always open them up in another tab so I can zoom in. I get such great pleasure and fun out of looking at some of those pictures of the Sandmaster, the Bobby Farrows, of the time at the Mint 400 or something, and all of them got bent wheels, and you see them today with all the huge beadlocks, and you never even see a bent wheel nowadays, right? Compared, because they have so much wheel travel and such good wheels, and the drivers are so good. But I remember those days, right? And I get a kick out of that. And I applaud you for finding all of those and putting those up there. I get great pleasure of that.
I do too, and that's the whole reason I do it. By the way, for listeners, it's called Off-Road Racing Buggies. But it's just really neat looking back at all the old technology, and I kind of prefer that myself. But I mean, it's also gone some of it I think has gone a
Yeah.
little too much, unfortunately, and
Yeah.
trophy
Yeah.
trucks tend to tear up a lot of the tracks and that, but
Very much
everything
so.
there is positives to it. You take a look at even simple things that came into the 80s, like suspension seats. Before it was the old hard
Yep.
plastic seats, and now they've gone to better neck support and stuff like that, especially after Earnhardt's crash.
So much safer now.
So much safer. Yeah.
GPS alone. I never drove a desert car that had GPS in it. Nowadays, I chat with guys that are out there racing, and they know where that ditch is, right?
Yep.
So now they're doing 30, 40 miles an hour faster than I ever went, and they're in the dust, and they're going along and they can't see, and all they know is there's a tree up here on the right and there's a ditch, 0.4 miles ahead, and they go until they're 0.1, and then they hit the brakes, right, and feel for the ditch in the dust.
Yep.
It's an amazingly different way of driving than what I did. And then I've talked with some of them, been out to the desert races, and there are whoop-de-doos that I look at, and I'm in my buggy mind, right? And I look at that and I'm going, there's no way we could get on top of that. If I did get on top of it, it was on the edge, right? You were going along. At some point, you might get out of time with it, and you're in big trouble. And then I watch a 1600 buggy come through there, and he's flat to the floor in third or fourth gear, and the suspension is just eating it up. Let alone the trophy trucks and the Bryce Menzies, and you watch some of these things in super slow motion, super high def, and they're going through some whoops that are they're bigger than the buggies we raced, right? And these trucks is just the tires are just eating it up, and they're going perfectly straight, and it's just amazing technology.
Yeah, it's definitely really interesting to watch. So speaking of technology, we're going to throw a segue into what you're currently doing with your life.
Yeah, what do I do now? And that motorsports itch is always there, right? And I've been lucky enough to a company called AIM Sports, and AIM Sports is an Italian product, but we're the North American importer of them, and I'm the national training manager for the company. We have these pieces of hardware that we put in all forms of motorsports, whether it's from go-karts to circle track to off-road cars and buggies, everything, Dakar, and of course road racing is a big part of what we do. And not only is it a dash that gives the driver the feedback, the low oil pressure, the shift lights, the lap times, whatever it is that they want it to program to be, but it's also recording the data. And that's a big part of what I do, is teach the software that you've got these data files, whether it be a 200-mile stretch to San Felipe or a quarter-mile dirt track on a late model, super late model or something. You've got data, and then people want to look at that and go, okay, what's my oil pressure doing? We have this thing we call the data analysis triangle. We're trying to improve the car, make the car faster.
Right.
That's suspension travel or sway bars or whatever it is that you're trying to do. Then we have the driver performance side. We're trying to improve the driver. What else can you do better? Can you go deeper into the corner? Can you turn in earlier? Can you whatever, right? And then we've got the third piece of that, which is important in the off-road side especially, is the vehicle health.
Right.
And so we're really looking at three different things with all these data files that come in, and it's just great fun to me to be able to have this knowledge of motorsports that I have with some background in the off-road at least, and be able to sit down with people and understand, number one, what the driver is thinking and going through. And you can't just say you're slower here by 7 miles per hour to your teammate, why don't you just go faster? I know it's harder than that because I've been a driver. And so then you look at this data and you help them break it down into areas that help them understand it to go faster. It's such a valuable tool. Modern electronics have come to the point where we've got gauges that are in the $500 range that you can put into cars and last forever. You've got sensors for oil pressure and fuel pressure and oil temperatures, and then of course all the GPS is there, and so where you're at on the track, when it was, and lap times and all that kind of stuff. And it's such a valuable tool for racers. It's almost to the point where you can't race without something like that now.
So just for reference again, it's aimsports.com. Definitely worth checking out their website. Find more information.
Yeah, we also have a Facebook page. Just type in for AIM Sports, and AIM Sports YouTube site, where a lot of what I do lately, since the pandemic especially, is we've been doing online webinars. They're a little bit of a long form, about an hour, and where we bring in and we talk about data technology and topics, and we'll focus on something for that hour. And we've done about 150 of them since 2020.
One of the questions I always ask at the end of each podcast is, what Canadian would you like to listen to on the 4x4 Canada podcast?
That's a difficult one. I would love to hear some more people that were from my era, obviously. Yep. Some of those folks that we named earlier. But I still, again, it sounds crazy from a racer, from the off-road racer of me, but the overlanding thing, it to me is still such a intriguing thing. You get the most out of your vehicle, but you're doing it at a low speed, right? There's the climbing of the hills, and there's the endurance of the vehicle,
yep,
and making sure it rides good. And to me, the overlanding thing, I enjoy whenever you have anything like that, yep. and I will continue to watch those and listen to those.
We definitely have some more overlanders planned on coming up. There's some really, really interesting people. Just some of their stories, and the drones have brought a whole new level to YouTube videos.
To the cinema side of it, right? It's just amazing what you can see.
Yeah, exactly. So
very, very cool.
Beautiful.
I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you.
I've had a great time, and again, I really enjoy watching 3 or 4 of your Facebook pages that you do. At least there's some there that I read them as well. But the buggies and the vintage off-road ones are the funnest to me. So, but I'm thankful for you doing this. And
thanks for coming on.
Some of the folks that we used to race against to get a chance to listen, and it brings up some memories in their mind, because that's what I've done for the last 4 or 5 days, thinking back. So I've enjoyed it.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on board, and we'll definitely chat again soon.
Thanks very much, Wes. I appreciate it.